Hello everybody, this is Pastor Graham Field again from Kingsway Church in Wombourne, welcoming you to our Bible study today. We have come to the sixth part in our study in the amazing Gospel of John. And as usual, we're going to begin by reading some verses from the Bible. We've come to John chapter 6, and we're going to read from verse 1 to verse 15. This is the story that is generally entitled Jesus feeding the 5,000. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the miraculous signs he had performed on the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountain and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover feast was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming towards him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 8 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many?" And Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and the men sat down, about 5,000 of them. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the miraculous sign that Jesus did, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. Just so far for the time being. May God bless to us the reading of his word. To remind you that the key to understanding John's Gospel is chapter 20, verses 30 to 31, which says, "Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." John selected a number of events and incidents from the life of Jesus that he had witnessed, and he recorded them for the same reason that they impacted him, that we may believe who Jesus is. He wrote in the very end of the Gospel, "Jesus did many other things as well, and if every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would have to be written." So today we have come to the 4th and the 5th of the 7 great signs that John selected to reveal to us who Jesus was. As I've said, we generally call this the feeding of the 5,000. In the first 3 signs, they were impacting an individual: the manager of the feast, the nobleman's son, and the lame man at the pool. But here the beneficiaries of the sign are a crowd of over 5,000 people. So what does it tell us about Jesus? It tells us that he is Lord over quantity. He is Lord over quantity. No matter how big the situation, Jesus is Lord over quantity. So significant is this sign, it is recorded in all 4 Gospels. It tells us that Jesus is not only able to deal with small things and individual things, but he could take on the big things, the corporate things as well. Another difference with this sign is that Jesus tries to involve his disciples for the first time in working the miracle rather than doing it all by himself. He was sort of saying, the crowds are here because I can perform miracles. They are here to see what I can do for them. But to his disciples he was saying something very different. He was asking them, how much have you believed about who I am? How much have you believed about who I am? When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming towards him, he said to Philip, where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? He asked this only to test him, for he had already had in mind what he was going to do. Jesus was sort of saying this, Philip, from what you have believed about me up to this point, if you were me, what would you do? So, Philip got out his calculator. 5,000 people, rolls, white, brown, margarine, large tub, tomatoes, plenty, cheese, a lot, at least 2 Tesco trucks full, and because Tesco's had not yet been invented, he said to Jesus, let's just send them home. Actually, what he said was, it would take more than half a year's wage to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. But it amounted to the same thing. Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will this go among so many? He was trying to be helpful. All our problems will be unsurmountable until through believing we grasp how great the Son of God is. Jesus had the people sit down. He was going to show them once more who he was by what he did. He took the 5 fish sandwiches and fed the 5,000 people. In fact, he made so many fish sandwiches, they were fed up of fish sandwiches, and there were 12 basketfuls left over. Jesus was demonstrating that if he could feed 5,000, he could feed 500,000, he could feed 5 million, he could feed the whole world if he wanted to. There was no limit to his capability. He was Lord over quantity. No matter how big the problem, he was bigger than the problem. The power of the gospel was not going to run out like a cheap AA battery after the first 5,000 converts. There were 12 basketfuls of surplus food. His grace would always be more than enough. His grace would always be as powerful as it was at the beginning. His grace would be as powerful to believers today as it was to believers 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years later, the gospel is the same today as it ever was. His power to save, to heal, to deliver and transform, to restore is as potent for us today who dare to believe as it was for those who first believed. The people wanted to make him king. It was the Red Cross, Red Crescent, United Nations, Oxfam and World Vision all rolled into one. But Jesus went away. Belief is not primarily thinking of what Jesus can do for me, but believing who he is and resting in the greatness and immensity of his grace. The people applauded him because he did spectacular things that benefited them. But the disciples were learning who Jesus was. They were seeing the sign, not just benefiting from the sign. Your needs are not too big for Jesus. Your complications will not outstretch his ability to solve. This story quickly leads us to the fifth of the great signs that reveal to us who Jesus is. And we need to read from verse 16 to verse 21. When the evening came, his disciples went down to the lake, where they got into a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. When they had rowed 3 or 3.5 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." Then they were willing to take him onto the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. We call this story the walking on the water, and the other gospel writers give us an awful lot more detail about this spectacular event, and it displays to us once more the greatness of Jesus. Once more the beneficiaries were not just one person, but all the disciples in the boat. And Jesus is here displaying and demonstrating that he is Lord over the natural order. He is Lord over the natural order. They had delayed their journey. They were caught in a rising storm. It wasn't yet fatal, but it was about to be. Their journey would have lasted altogether about 8 miles. They had only travelled at most 3.5 miles, and they were exhausted. Jesus displays his lordship over the natural order by walking on the water, that is, defying gravity, walking against the wind faster than they could row, showing his lordship over the natural elements. And when he entered the boat, he shortened the elapse of time, so that instead of being in the middle of the lake, they were immediately approaching the harbour wall of Capernaum. In Matthew's account, in chapter 8 verse 27, these words were added: "What kind of man is this, that even the winds and the waves obey him? Truly, you are the Son of God." Jesus, Lord over the natural order. Whether it be an emotional storm, a mental storm, or a spiritual storm, or a physical storm that you're passing through, Jesus is not bound or limited by the forces unleashed in the storm. Many times I have been exhausted in the storm. I just could not fight the wind of a situation anymore. Then suddenly Jesus came, and it was all over, and I had arrived in a safe place. Maybe like the disciples, you have set out on a journey you should not have set out on. You set out too late. You set off in the face of a gathering storm. Like the disciples, you should never have set out at that time. But it's too late now. You can't go back. Events will take their course. The wind will blow, the waves will rise, and the storm will take its effect. Here Jesus displays that this is not necessarily what is going to happen. Here comes Jesus, walking on the water against the wind. He's the Lord over the natural order of things. Now, most of the time, the natural order is what happens. That's why it's called the natural order. But he is able to suspend the natural order and change things to bring people out of the storm into a safe place. He's able to override things which are bigger and greater than you and I, but not bigger and greater than he. You see, it's all about Jesus. This gospel is all about Jesus, revealing to us who he is, that we can expect a miraculous intervention, things that belong to an age to come, brought in fragment into the age in which we live, to bring us to know who Jesus is and to proclaim him as the Son of God, the Saviour of the world. I hope you're getting to know him a little bit better through these studies. I hope you're getting to see who Jesus is through the stories that John has selected for us, that we may believe, and by believing have life in his name. Thank you for being with me for this study. I hope you will join me again for our further studies. May God bless you. Amen.